chers amis, grande famille libérale, ça me fait très plaisir d'être aujourd'hui avec vous pour vous présenter le ministre avec qui j'ai la chance de travailler depuis 7 mois. Et je veux juste vous raconter une petite anecdote. Il y a 7 mois, en septembre 2017, quand j'ai été nommé secrétaire parlementaire aux finances par le premier ministre Trudeau, j'étais en route vers Ottawa et je reçois un appel. Je suis au service au volant d'un Tim Hortons. Le premier ministre appelle. Je lui dis « Monsieur Trudeau, pouvez-vous m'attendre 1 minute? Il faut que je finisse de payer pour mon Tim glacé. » Le premier ministre part à rire, me dit « Il n'y a pas de problème, Joël, prends ton temps. » Et en y réfléchissant, je me disais « Il n'y a pas un moment plus canadien que de se faire appeler par le premier ministre dans un service au volant d'un Tim Hortons. » Mais une fois le choc passé, j'ai pris pleinement conscience du privilège que c'était de travailler avec M. Morneau. Parce que quand il y a des journées plus difficiles pour moi à Ottawa, et il y en a dans la vie d'un député des journées difficiles, il y a un moment qui me revient toujours en tête, un moment très clair. En mars 2016, quand j'étais assis sur la toute dernière banquette, près des rideaux dans la Chambre des communes, et que le ministre des Finances a déposé son budget 2016 dans lequel il y avait l'allocation canadienne pour enfants, qui aide des millions de familles à travers le pays, qui aurait eu un impact majeur dans la famille de ma mère, mon frère et moi quand j'étais petit, juste comme ça en a un dans plusieurs familles, d'un océan à l'autre au pays. Ça a sorti 300 000 enfants de la pauvreté. Ça réduit la pauvreté infantile de 40 % au pays. Et même si le ministre Morneau et moi, on a des parcours différents, je sais qu'on a le cœur à la même place. Je suis le fruit d'une société où l'ascenseur social fonctionne, d'une société juste. Et depuis 7 mois que je travaille avec le ministre et je le vois chaque semaine se battre pour préserver cette société où chacun a la chance de s'accomplir à son plein potentiel. C'est pour moi un insigne privilège de vous présenter aujourd'hui l'honorable Bill Morneau, notre ministre des Finances. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Bonjour. Et merci Joël. J'ai beaucoup apprécié travailler avec Joël pendant la dernière année. C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être avec lui chaque journée. Donc merci. I want to say it's really great to be here in Halifax. I'm so happy so many people are here. It's particularly great because I've got some really great colleagues from this area. So colleagues that many of you know, people like Darren, Daryl, Jeff Reagan, Andy Fillmore. I also, of course, have to mention Scott Bryson. For those of you who don't know, Scott's my next-door seatmate in the House of Commons. So for me, the House of Commons can never get boring. The challenge is, while you're sitting listening to question period, you've got Scott Bryson saying something completely different in your ear that has nothing to do with what's going on, and you're trying to remember what you're trying to say while he's making a joke about something that happened 3 days ago or about some of the people across the aisle. Anyway, it makes it all that much more challenging, and I can tell you absolutely all that much more fun, frankly, to be in the House of Commons. But one of the reasons it's so great for me to be here in Halifax is it reminds me of what I can tell you has been, for me, since I've been in this role, one of my very best days. A few months ago, we came to Halifax to unveil the new $10 banknote. Some of you may know that for the very first time on a circulating banknote, we will have a woman. And more importantly, we will have Viola Desmond, who's an iconic hero in this part of the world. She is someone who broke boundaries of race, and now, posthumously, she's breaking boundaries of gender. And it's an enormous statement for our country. And importantly, all of us, in a couple months' time, will be able to walk around with a little piece of Halifax history in our wallets or in our pockets, so I'm excited about that. As Joël mentioned, in case you weren't watching the exciting news during the course of the fall, I am the finance minister. It's been lots of fun, I can tell you, on a day-to-day basis, and continues to be an enormous privilege. So I thought today I'd talk obviously from that vantage point about our economy, and also a sense of how I think our country is faring, about the difference we're making for hardworking families here in Halifax about the difference we're making across the country. But I'd like to start with what I think is most important. And for the people in this room, I'd like to start with a thank you, because really it's the people in this room together who came up with the ideas that gave us the opportunity to have a winning campaign in 2015. And I know that what we've done over the course of this weekend and what we're going to continue to do today is to come up with the ideas that will enable us to keep doing what we're doing for Canadians in 2019, another winning campaign. So I want to thank you all for your hard work. I know that for most of you, you're here for the opportunity to see your friends, to discuss policy. But I know when you're not here, you're making phone calls, you're knocking on doors, you're volunteering, you're having periodically awkward or tough conversations with your neighbors and your friends and your family, all on behalf of the greater good of Canadians. So I want to thank you for all that work, which we know is making an enormous difference. And above all, on behalf of all Canadians, I want to thank you for reminding us what we're here to do, and importantly, who we're here to do it for. Because we weren't sent to Ottawa to keep things just humming along. And that's good news, because as you might remember, 2.5 years ago, things weren't going that particularly well in Ottawa. We were sent there to actually make real change. And I've got to tell you that that is exactly what we're doing. Aujourd'hui, près de 9 millions de Canadiens ont plus d'argent dans leur poche, parce qu'ensemble, nous avons décidé que les plus riches devaient payer un peu plus pour que les classes moyennes puissent avoir un peu plus pour leur famille. Ça s'appelle changer ensemble. Today, 9 out of 10 families in our country have extra help with raising their kids, because we decided that sending child benefit checks to the richest in our country wasn't really that great an idea. That's real change. But as we think about that one single policy, what we really reflect on is that what happened in 2017 in this country is 300,000 Canadian kids were lifted out of poverty. So just to put that in perspective for those of you who aren't from Halifax, that's about the same number of people that live in urban Halifax. It's really an impressive thing that we've done, and it will absolutely stand the test of time. I've got to tell you from my perspective, every day that I have this job, I'm reminded of the enormous responsibility. It's obviously the case that being out talking to business and economic leaders in boardrooms in Halifax or Montreal or Calgary or Toronto or Vancouver, you get to hear what's going on, you get to help. Going out around the world to G20 or G7 meetings, obviously you're part of trying to make the world a better place. Or where I was this week, I was at the International Monetary Fund and World Bank meetings, where Canada is playing an important role. But I've got to tell you that the responsibility of this job comes to you most when you get the opportunity to go out and talk to Canadians and to hear their stories. For me, one of the stories that reminds me of how important the job is happened a couple of years ago. Some of you may have heard it because I mentioned it in my budget speech a year and a half ago. And it was one day when I was in Toronto. I was going out for dinner one evening, and I came out of the restaurant, and I got into a taxi cab. And one of the new things in my job is people tend to recognize you, for good or bad. And the taxi cab driver looked in the rearview mirror, and he recognized who I was. And so he asked me a question that was unusual. Normally I get the question, about taxes or about NAFTA, but he said, "Can I call my wife?" And I said, "Sure." And he put his wife on the phone, so we were in the speakerphone in his cab. And what he wanted to do on the speakerphone with his wife was to thank me. Because for him and his family, the Canada Child Benefit meant $300 more per month, every month, for them and their 3 children. And so it's days like that that make you realize what an enormous privilege and also what a huge opportunity having this job is. I can tell you when you hear about what happens for a family and when you see the opportunity to make real change. Another little story for you. when I was campaigning, and like most of you in this room, you were part of the campaign, knocking on doors, calling people, making sure that we got as many people out to vote as possible. One day, one of my volunteers, a 13-year-old girl, she came to me and asked me whether she could have a private meeting. And of course I said yes, and she was a really sweet young girl. And she came over to me and she handed me a little tiny yellow note. And I took the note from her and I unwrapped it. And on this note, she had written her name and the name of her 5 siblings and her parents and their phone number and how we could get in touch with them. And she'd written a number on the bottom. And the number was the waiting list number that they had to get housing in Toronto because they didn't have adequate housing. They actually didn't have a place to call home. And this is the way that she was asking me to help her. So these are the sort of things that you hear when you get a chance to go across this country. You get the chance to understand the great stories from Canadians, to hear the issues and the challenges, the people who need good, well-paying jobs so that they can raise their family, their children, and their grandchildren. And as you know, it's all about those people. It's about the middle class, the people working hard to join it, that we're working so hard for in your government. We know that that's the thing that we have to consider. We have to think about the programs that can make a difference. Des programmes comme la nouvelle allocation canadienne pour les travailleurs, qui permettra aux travailleurs à faible revenu de ramener plus d'argent à la maison pendant qu'ils travaillent. N'oublions pas non plus l'allocation canadienne pour enfants, qui aide les familles et qui tiendra compte de l'augmentation du coût de la vie. Ou encore, la toute première stratégie nationale sur le logement, pour que plus de gens, comme la famille de la jeune fille que j'ai mentionnée, puissent trouver un logement abordable pour leur famille. Notre plan comprend aussi des investissements dans les Canadiens quand ils ont le plus besoin, que ce soit au moment où ils entrent dans le marché du travail pour la première fois, quand ils se trouvent un nouvel emploi, de leur planifier leur retraite. And you may have heard in our recent budget, we had a special focus on women and girls. I wanted to tell you something about that. For me, the way to communicate this became obvious one morning. A couple of weeks before our budget, I was home alone. My 4 children are all away at school, and my wife wasn't home, and I was preparing my speech and walking around and sort of peering into my children's bedrooms, as you do when you're alone in your home. And I noticed behind one of my daughter's beds, there was a handwritten sign. And the sign said, "We cannot all succeed if half of us are held back." And it was a quote from Malala. And I realized in that moment that my daughter and Malala, and I know you in this room understand, that when we support women, when women aren't held back, when we provide opportunities and the ability for people to engage in the economy, we know that that helps our entire economy for all Canadians. It makes a huge difference to our long-term success together. Now, just a word about some of the things you'll hear when you're out there. I know that people say this is virtue signaling, and they'll say things like, they'll discount our new parental sharing benefit, or they'll say that the proactive pay equity legislation, that's really just virtue signaling. Well, what I want to say is this, to the opposition who says that, to the people across the aisle, if part of their job description isn't helping half the population, then maybe they should think about a new line of work. Because what do we know? We know that when women and girls succeed, we all succeed. And what I can tell you, if signaling that as a virtue, I'm happy to do that anytime, anywhere across this country. It's critically important. So earlier I told you about the gentleman, Mian, who was in I was in his taxi, and his thank you to me. But what I want to say is that really that thank you goes to all the people in this room. Because really it's about us coming together. It's about your compassion, your generosity, your willingness to help build a country and an economy where everyone has a real and fair chance at success. That's what we've done together. It's really your ability to work with us that's enabled the middle-class tax cut. It's what's enabled us in our last 3 budgets to invest in infrastructure, to invest in science and innovation, to invest in wildlife, species, our parks, our environment. These are the things that we're able to do together. It's what allowed us to offer more help for students, for seniors, for small businesses. And we know that it's your hard work combined with a really strong fiscal position and an approach to dealing with our finances that's responsible, that's helping us to build confidence for the future. And what we can say now, 2.5 years in, is that the approach is working. Let's just think about where we're at. 2.5 years later, we've created together 600,000 new jobs in this country, most of them full-time. It's important to note that our unemployment rate is now at about the lowest it's been since 1976. I don't think most of my staffers in my political office were actually born then. So, seriously. We are at a situation where we've led all G7 countries since 2016 in terms of rates of growth. Really an important change in our country over the last 2.5 years. And people are starting to feel more confident about their future, confident about what's happening for them and their families. D'une bout à l'autre, au pays, nous travaillons à renouveler la relation avec les peuples autochtones et poursuivons nos efforts pour faire en sorte que chaque personne au Canada ait accès à de l'eau potable. Nous protégeons nos océans, dépolluons l'air que nous respirons et faisons en sorte que nos villes soient des milieux de nos meilleurs, tout en nous assurant que nos ressources soient acheminées vers le marché. Nous voyons à ce que le monde entier sache que le Canada est une nation commerçante, prête à faire des affaires. Et nous ferons en sorte que chaque Canadien puisse s'offrir les médicaments d'ordonnance dont il a besoin en écoutant les recommandations de notre Conseil consultatif sur la mise en œuvre d'un régime national d'assurance médicaments. I want to say, we have big plans. We know there's more to do. We know the work you're doing over these days is going to help us to get there. And it's a competitive world. People come to me and say, we need to be competitive. We need to put our best foot forward. But I can tell you that I have absolute confidence in Canada's workers and in Canadian businesses. And I know that all of you here in the room do too. I know that we can go up against the best in the world and we can win. I know that Canada is a fantastic place to invest and to grow a business and to raise a family. And I'll never tire of sharing that message, whether across Canada or around the world. But I also know that for every person we're able to help, for every child that's been raised out of poverty, for every young person who has a better chance in a new first job, for every family, like the family of that young girl who has an affordable place to live, for every senior who's able to retire in dignity, I know there's someone else who's asking us to do even more, to make sure that we keep going on our mission, to fight hard for more good, well-paying jobs, for more opportunities. And I want you to know that we will keep fighting. Our work is not done. So we know we're headed into an election next year, and the choices couldn't be more stark. Canadians need to know that with their government, they can expect a more confident approach, a more ambitious approach, one that invests in Canadians and in the things that matter most to Canadians. And our opponents? Well, I can tell you, they still favor the failed policies that led to stubborn unemployment and the worst rates of growth that we saw since the Great Depression. And I'll tell you this, as your finance minister and as an experienced business person, I can tell you to return to those policies, in my estimation, would be sheer incompetence. Did I misspeak? Seriously, to ignore the environment, to ignore Indigenous peoples, and the most vulnerable people in our society, to maintain a system where women don't have the same opportunities as men, to still think that we can cut our way to prosperity. It's just not the right way to go. I'm here on stage as Canada's Finance Minister because 2.5 years ago, Canadians rejected these outdated, out-of-touch ways to run an economy and to run a country. And I'm confident that if we continue on our path, continue to work hard here in Halifax, in Ottawa, in our communities across the country, Canadians will again choose a confidence, an approach that is ambitious about what we can do together. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. We know that. But it's hard to argue with the results that we're seeing, with the economic growth that we're delivering, and the growing confidence that we're seeing across the country. I've learned a few lessons over the last couple of years in politics, I will tell you. And one of them is this: when the opponents go for the cheap shots, it means that we must be doing something right. When they can't go after our ideas, they're going to go after everything else. And my view is that's okay, because the results speak for themselves. Canadians are doing better. And Canadians are smart enough to see through the overblown rhetoric. I have faith in the decency, the generosity, the compassion, and the intelligence of our fellow Canadians because I get to see it every single day. And I know here in this room, surrounded by people who know that what we got in 2015, we earned the right to work on behalf of Canadians. And what we're trying to do in 2019, what we're going to do in 2019, is assure that we can continue to work hard every day to make a real difference for this country. So what I want to do now is thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Thank you for your hope. And thank you for your hard work. Merci beaucoup.